A reading from Matthew 27, 1-10. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is this to us? See to it yourself." Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money." After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah, and they took the 30 pieces of the silver, the price of the one on whom a price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for having me again. It's always lovely to be in Bessells Green. I'm sure the sun never goes down here because I don't think it's rained once since I've been here, and I've been here quite a few times now, and it always feels like a lovely, safe space. So thank you for having me back today to talk about this slightly more challenging topic than we've discussed previously when I've been here. Let me sort my papers out. I think Andy's probably told you enough about me, really, but I've been working with the church for a couple of years now. My background, I worked at Samaritans for 10 years, the suicide prevention charity Samaritans, but I've been freelancing for a couple of years, for 5 years nearly now. Mostly working on project things, but I do get involved in training around suicide prevention and mental health as well. And what we're going to talk about today is just a little snapshot of a suicide prevention course that I run. It's a difficult subject. I'm sure this will be touched on again later in the service, but we can all be affected by it in different ways. Suicide may have touched our lives, and we all react differently to it. So please think about looking after yourselves and the people around you. I talk about Samaritans quite a lot because of my experience there, but they're always available 24/7 on 116, 123, and there's other ways to contact them as well. Before we get into kind of some of the practicalities of supporting people when they're struggling, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why we might want to do that. And when we're talking about numbers in suicide, it's easy to kind of gloss over the fact that they're individuals. They are people that have died, people have been left behind, families and friends have been impacted by that death. So let's not dismiss that as just pure numbers. So please don't think I'm doing that when I go through some of these things. But I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the big issues that we are facing in suicide prevention. Often people talk about this kind of suicide crisis and the rising rates of suicide, but actually up until the last couple of years, we've seen a fairly static suicide rate up until about 2023, since 2018, although the numbers are obviously too high, and one death is one too many. What many people don't always know is that suicide impacts men. 3 times as many men die by suicide as women. And the biggest age group that's impacted by suicide has been men in the middle years, and that's been historically the same for a long, long time. Most recently, that rate was for the group aged 45 to 49. It does tend to fluctuate in the age groups around the 30 to 55 kind of age group. And suicide rates nationally tend to track areas of deprivation. If people are not as well off, then they struggle to deal with some of the life events that life throws at us, and that can happen at an individual level, but also happens at a regional level as well. And most recently, the Northwest has seen the highest rates of suicide, whereas we see London and the Southeast tends to have the lowest rates. I should say the numbers on the screen are from 2023, and they're the latest full year's worth of statistics. There was a new strategy for England in 2023, back end of 2023, and it hadn't really been a huge change of direction, but I wanted to highlight some of the risk groups and risk factors that were picked out from that strategy, and they had added a couple of things to both those lists. I've touched on the middle-aged men already. Children and young people are on that list, and we'd seen a rise up until that point, particularly women under 25. People who have self-harmed, and if people have self-harmed, that does not necessarily mean they're suicidal, but we know that people in that group are at a higher risk of suicidal thoughts. No surprise that people that are in contact with the mental health services might be at risk of suicide, and that can play a part as one of the risk factors in individual people's lives. People in contact with the justice system, and that could be people that have been accused of a crime, but also people around that person. It could include victims and families. The last two on that, the risk group list, autistic people and pregnant women and new mothers, they were added to the list last time around when the strategy was updated. We're increasingly starting to understand the risk to autistic people around suicide, and that increased risk of someone being overwhelmed when they're autistic, and we're learning a lot more about how we can support those groups. And pregnant women and new mothers. Now, the numbers for that group aren't high compared to suicide statistics across the general population, but we know that that suicide is the leading cause of death in that period for that group, but also that the impact on a young life if a mother was to die in that period is huge, obviously, and obviously the ripple effect around that family, and that's why they're on there. And I often say, actually, it's a missed opportunity not to include dads in that group as well, because many of the things that we associate with the risks for middle-aged men can kind of start when you become a dad, even if you're 21, 31, 41, in terms of the things like the change of your relationship, the increased financial pressures, and the impact of some of the other life factors when you become a father as well. Anyone that works in kind of social care or health or justice system or works with vulnerable people will be familiar with all of the things that around the risk factors, and I don't suppose any of these will be a huge surprise when we go through them. But people that have got an enduring physical or physical illness, or if they're in long-term pain, that can be a big risk factor. Financial difficulty, which I've already touched on. Harmful gambling, and that can be obviously linked to financial difficulty, but touches on some of the other risk factors as well. Alcohol and drug misuse. Domestic abuse has become increasingly understood to be a huge part of suicide risk, including both perpetrator and victim. And we're starting to understand more about this sense of loneliness as well. And I think COVID really shone a light on loneliness, not just in groups that maybe historically that we'd understood were at risk, maybe older people, but actually across the age groups as well. So how do we avoid people reaching that crisis? And I should say some of those risk factors, it's rare for someone to reach a point of feeling suicidal because of one of those risk factors, and it could be that several of those have come together to kind of overwhelm someone, give them a sense of not feeling like they can get out of that space, that sense of hopelessness. So yeah, it's rare that it's one of those risk factors. And of course, there can be lots of other things going on in people's lives as well. So how do you identify those people? And this is quite a long list, so maybe I won't go through all of them, but often these things are things that people associate with low mood and poor mental health, as well as that suicidality. And just because they're displaying some of these things doesn't necessarily mean that they're suicidal, but these are kind of opportunities to kind of check in with someone if you notice some of these things. So it could be up and downs in mood. Are people being withdrawn? Are they not connecting with people? Are they not getting involved in social situations or at work in the way they might have done? Are they not looking after themselves properly? Are they wearing inappropriate clothing at wrong times of year? Are they out in shorts and t-shirt in the depths of winter? Are they wearing pyjamas at the railway station? Things like that. Has their routine changed? Are they struggling to sleep, or are they sleeping too much at the wrong times of day? Do they need to take a nap in the afternoon? Are they low or flat on energy? Are they starting to do reckless things, making rash decisions? Have things becoming unimportant to them that they start doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily do? That increased drug and alcohol use that is a risk factor. Have they started to talk about suicide or wanting to die? And sometimes people see that as a joke, or actually if they've said that they're suicidal, that actually means they're not, but that isn't the case. And actually, I was talking to someone on Friday night whose family work in the farming community, and he was saying that he knew at least 10 people from that community that had died by suicide, and that some of the things that he'd started to hear from that community, from some of the recent financial changes for the agricultural sector, he'd started to hear those things again, and was concerned about that. So if people do say that they're going to take their life, or even they use it as a threat, sometimes that can feel like that can actually be a warning sign. Sometimes when people reach that sort of point of being actively suicidal or making a plan to take their life, they might start giving away possessions or trying to put things in order for the people that come after them, saying goodbye in a much more heartfelt way than they would do if they were going to see you next weekend or the next day or whatever. And that sense of feeling worthless or fed up or trapped comes through strongly. Sometimes when we know someone very well, we can identify these things. If it's not someone we know so well, maybe it's someone in the church that you're not familiar with, or a colleague, or someone you come into contact with through work. You might pick up on one or two of these things, but if you're not sure, you can always check in with someone that knows them better, whether that's a family member or a friend, or we often talk about through work, if it's a service user, you could talk to someone that's a referral partner or something like that. So what are the things that they might say? Are they talking about suicide? Are they saying things like, I wish I hadn't been born? Oh, if I see you again, I really want to die. I'll be better off dead. You'd be better off without me. Those types of things. And do they have that preoccupation with death? Are they talking about it and focusing on it a lot more? We talk about hope in church a lot, don't we? And actually, it's the lack of hope that kind of can bring people to that point where they cannot face the future, and that's when suicide becomes an option. They can't see a way out. When those life events all come together, they've got maybe 3 or 4 things going on, and they just cannot get past some of them. Maybe they've had a relationship breakdown, they've lost their job, they're in debt. There's just no way out of that situation, and that's when that suicide becomes an option. Sometimes it's a feeling of unbearable pain. That could be physical, it could be emotional, there could be a sense of shame. And that, again, the shame could be something that isn't, a big thing for somebody else, but it could be something that's impacted them through a relationship, or it could be something bigger. Maybe they've hurt someone or committed a crime. And then there's that sense of feeling a burden, and this could be because they've lost their job and they're financially reliant on their parents or a partner or even their children, or maybe they've had a physical illness or they're getting older and they don't want to be a burden to the people around them because they need looking after more. And again, that's when they start to think, well, how do I get out of this situation? And the only way out could be through suicide. When I first started in suicide prevention, I worked on a programme with the railway to reduce suicides on railways, and there were some enduring attitudes on the railway that if someone was suicidal, that they would just go on and take their life. There's nothing you could do about it. But actually, we know that isn't the case, and with the right intervention at the right time, people can go on and live a healthy and happy life. And actually, the period of suicide, that peak suicidality where someone might actually go on to take their life, can be quite short-lived, a matter of minutes or hours. So if you make an intervention before that point or during that period and get them the support they need, obviously some of those big social issues won't have gone away, but that peak period of suicidality might have gone away, and then you can get them the help they need for those other things that they're struggling with. So how do we support those people? Now, this slide could be focused on people that you know, or equally someone outside in the public that maybe you don't know, but you've identified them as a potential risk. So observe, are they doing something out of the ordinary? And that, when it's somebody you know, maybe that's obvious, but in other places, are they putting themselves at risk, or are they doing something in a way that you wouldn't ordinarily expect? So on the railway staff might notice that they're standing in the wrong place. Commuters don't normally stand in that place, or because there's no train stop there, or they get wet because of the rain or whatever. So they understand those behaviours, so they trust their instincts and go and speak to them. Another project I've worked on at a high-risk location, they have these rangers that are working there, and they know the types of behaviours where regular tourists or dog walkers and how they behave and what they're wearing and what they're doing. But if someone's acting outside of that normal behaviour, they go and have a conversation and go and speak to them. So it's trusting your instinct. What's the worst that could happen? You approach somebody and you have a conversation and they're fine. Great. But if they're not, you've had that opportunity to speak to them. Sometimes it can be hard. I mean, certainly from the southeast in London, we don't really like talking to strangers that much. You're much better at it in here, I know, because people always come and say hi to me when I arrive. But it does feel awkward, doesn't it, talking to someone at a railway station or in public. But you don't have to ask them something deep and meaningful in that first moment. You could just have a throwaway comment about the weather, or when's the next bus coming, or do you know where a coffee shop is, or have you got the time? And their reaction to what you say can sometimes give you an indication whether something's not quite right. And those rangers I mentioned previously, that's what they do. They ask them, where are you off to today? And if the person reacts in a kind of volatile way, or just in a way you wouldn't expect someone that was just going on a dog walk would do, then they can then ask some more meaningful questions. So that's when you can dive into a deeper conversation, ask them more about how they're feeling, what they're doing, and on the next slide we'll talk a bit more about how to do that. Obviously, if it's someone around you, you might be in a safe space, you might be in church, you might be in the office, you might be at home. But if you're not, if you're in a high-risk location, somewhere where somebody could get hurt, or maybe they've harmed themselves already, get them to a place of safety. So that might be get them into a coffee shop or a waiting room, or away from that, whatever the thing is that is dangerous. And if it's not safe for you to do so, don't put yourself in danger, but of course, call a member of staff, or if that's not possible, of course, 999. Some of the small talk things you could ask, I think I touched on these. Have you got the time? Crazy weather? When's the next train or bus coming? Where can I get a coffee? Things like that. Some of you will have done kind of conversational training and things in the past. Maybe you've done suicide prevention training. But here's just a kind of whistle-stop tour of what you could ask them. I really like this idea of asking a question twice. How often do we come into church or go into the office and say, how are you? I'm fine, great, have a great day. And you have absolutely no idea how that person is at all. I really like this idea of asking someone twice how they're doing. How are you? No, really, how are you today? Tell me how you're doing. And that will make people think twice and actually open up a conversation. Ask open questions that don't elicit a yes or no response. So the what, when, where, how, why type questions. Respond to what they say, react to it, so they know that you've heard them and understood what they're saying. Be present. If you've become aware that someone's struggling, create a space for that person to talk about it. Find a separate room, put your phone away, make sure they've got time and space to talk about those types of things. Be supportive. Whatever it is that they're saying in that moment, whether it's something really difficult, if they're talking about something that they're ashamed of what they've done, this isn't the moment to be judgmental about it. We want to be supportive. It might be the first time they've talked about that issue for them, so it's going to be difficult. So let's be free of judgment. Know that you value them. Sometimes that sense of worthlessness comes through when people are feeling suicidal. And so if we can make people feel valued, even if they're a stranger in that moment, that can bring them back from that place. You don't need to solve their problems in that moment. As I mentioned before, the things that got them to that point are bigger social things potentially that can't be solved in a quick conversation, but you can walk alongside them through the journey to getting better. But there might be practical things you can do as well. Can you signpost them to service? Is there something that you can actually physically help them with? And can you help them get help elsewhere as well? Open questions are on the screen there, the who, what, when, where, whys. And asking these questions just helps them open up and talk more. If you're just getting a yes or no response to them, it's very hard to gauge how that person might be feeling. And also, don't worry if you don't ask an open question, don't worry, the next one could be an open question. Don't get too bogged down in some of those things. Encourage them to talk about how they're feeling, dig a little deeper, really kind of get under the skin of what is going on for them, what they're struggling with and how they feel about it. You don't necessarily have to, you can empathise with them, but you don't necessarily have to fully understand what they're going through. I wouldn't preempt their responses to questions either, because, for example, they might have had a relationship breakdown and they split up with their girlfriend, and you might think, oh, that's terrible, you split up with your girlfriend, but actually it might be a positive thing for them. So kind of understand how they're feeling about that specific situation. Don't be afraid of silence as well. This is a really big one. Sometimes this is the first time they've spoken about it. It's a really difficult thing to talk about. And actually just give them time to sit there. And don't feel you need to fill that silence, because the more you're speaking, the less that they're speaking. Make them laugh. Obviously, in an appropriate way at the right moment. But actually, laughter can really break the tension in those conversations and bring the conversation back up. Don't minimise their feelings. I remember, I always tell this story. I was in a cafe a couple of years ago, and I was earwigging on a conversation of two ladies behind me, and one was saying to the other, oh, you've got a great job, a great family, a lovely husband. What have you got to be depressed about? And completely diminishing how that person was feeling. We all react differently to situations. We all cope with things differently. And just understand how that person might be feeling. Don't offer false hope. You can't say, oh, you're 20 grand in debt, we'll sort that out tomorrow, you'll be fine. But you can be alongside them during that situation. Be direct as well. Ask them very direct questions so you can get to the bottom of how they're feeling. And ask them, are you suicidal? Have you thought about taking your life? Some people are anxious that by asking that question, they're going to make the situation worse. But actually, there's no evidence to suggest that. And actually, that might be the first time they've been able to verbalise it or use that language, or actually, they might be suicidal, but not even necessarily realise that they were. So being able to say it out loud releases this pressure valve, takes that weight off them, and again, gives you that opportunity to address what those situations are. Just these are different ways to ask that question about being suicidal. I know it's quite small on the screen, but do you feel suicidal? Do you feel like ending it? Do you feel like ending your own life? Are you thinking about suicide? Have you had thoughts about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? I know that's a lot to take in quite a short space of time, and when we do the training, we unpick that in a bit more detail and give people a chance to talk about it a bit more. But when I was sat there just now, waiting to come up, I always noticed the words around the church that you've got here, and I just thought, if you forget all of those things I've talked about in the last 3 slides, if you can remember those things, actually, that conversation will be okay. So don't put pressure on yourself. Just look after that person in the moment. Just to quickly summarise those listening tips: show you care, respond to what they say, use those open questions so that they can open up, be patient and give them time, don't feel the need to fill that silence, repeat back to them what they've said so that they know that you've heard them and you understand what they say. What you say, less is more. So give them the chance to speak. And be courageous. Be courageous in asking them how they're doing and approaching them if you're worried about them. And be courageous not to fill that silence as well. The top tip I always put on that side is ask them if they're thinking about suicide. Ask that direct question. Don't be afraid to ask that one, because that might be the first time you've had a chance to talk about it. I'm going to wrap up there. You can always contact me. Everyone in the stewardship team's got my contact details if you want to know more about some of that. Again, be courageous, but also look after yourself in that moment. If anything I've said today has kind of impacted you in any way, come talk to me or any members of the team later. But also, when you go away and you're reflecting on it, do make sure that you're looking after yourself. It's really important that when we're helping others, we're looking after ourselves. And if you've had a difficult conversation like that, you don't necessarily need to share the private details of it with anyone, but do make sure that after you've gone through that emotional conversation, that you do something to look after yourself as well, whether that's offloading to someone else or doing something to look after your well-being. So thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Neil. That was really helpful. Thank you. Much to think and ponder about and chat with each other about. We're going to, in a few moments, we're going to celebrate communion together. But before we do that, we're going to sing, and then Charlie's going to offer a very brief reflection on that passage. It struck me, thinking about the series we've been doing, how Peter, who betrayed Jesus, how Judas betrayed Jesus, they were all there at the Last Supper. The Last Supper is only a couple of days before the events we hear about. They'd all heard Peter, they'd all heard Jesus say, "This is my body, which is given for you." They'd all received the cup when Jesus said, "This is my blood given for your salvation." They were kind of encompassed by those words and by crucifixion. And yet it was on the Emmaus Road where suddenly for 2 of the disciples, their eyes were opened and they saw Jesus in sharing bread and sharing wine together. So, do sit.
Okay, you will be very relieved this is not a sermon. This is a thought to send us into communion together. We wanted to give the bulk of the time today. I know it's a bit different, not a usual service, but we wanted to give the bulk of the time to Neil to equip us A real practical equipping in a way that might actually be useful to save a life. And as we tackle this passage today. So thank you, Neil, for sharing what you did. I wonder what you think of when you think of the name Judas Iscariot. His name is often shorthand for betrayal. He's the one who sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He's the traitor, the villain of the Easter story. Dante has him lost in the last circle of hell forever. And yet our reading today tells us that as he betrayed Jesus, Judas was seized with remorse. He ran to the temple to try to undo all that he'd done. He threw the 30 pieces of silver back at the priest's feet. Take it back! But it is too late. Jesus has been condemned. And unable to live with himself, Judas goes and takes his own life. And that's where the story ends, at least in the Gospels. And for centuries, the church has left Judas there, in disgrace, in shame, and in fear. But today I want to suggest that that is not where God leaves him. I wonder, what if Jesus never stopped loving Judas? I don't believe Judas was beyond redemption. I don't believe for a second that suicide is the unforgivable sin and that it places anyone beyond God's mercy. That is bad theology and it needs to be challenged. Many of us carry pain around stories like this. We've lost people. And some of us have lost people to suicide. Or we've walked through our own dark valleys. And the silence, the shame, and the bad theology around this topic only adds to the grief. So today I want to imagine. I want to wonder what might have been going through Jesus' heart when he heard that Judas was gone. You see, Judas wasn't just one of the 12. He was a friend. He'd walked the dusty roads with Jesus for 3 years. He'd sat around the fire at night. He'd laughed. He'd questioned. He'd hoped. He preached the kingdom, healed the sick, cast out demons. He was part of it all. And like Andy said when he preached on the betrayal a few weeks ago, I don't think it was greed that provoked Judas to betray Jesus. He wasn't trying to line his pockets. I think he was trying to force Jesus' hand. Maybe Judas believed, like many did, that the Messiah would rise up in power and overthrow the Romans. He would make Israel great again. And maybe he thought if he forced him, handed him over, Jesus would have to act. He'd have to call down the armies of heaven and start a revolution. And when that didn't happen, Judas realized too late what he'd done. And in his horror, in his shame, in his panic, he couldn't see a way back. He thought he'd gone too far. He believed the lie that shame always tells us, and that is, he believed that he was beyond forgiveness. But that, friends, is not the voice of God. It is not the voice Jesus would have spoken to Judas had he had the chance. Even in the garden, when Judas came to betray him, when the soldiers were there with torches, Jesus calls him friend. I don't believe that's sarcastic. I wonder if Jesus grieved deeply for Judas. I wonder if Jesus might have carried his name and his pain to the cross. And 3 days later, when he stepped out of the tomb, his gift of resurrection life was for everyone, including Judas. We say we remember that Jesus forgave Peter, who denied him 3 times. But we forget that Judas never saw the risen Christ. He never had the chance to hear those words that Jesus might have spoken to him too. You're still mine, come home. Friends, that is the heart of the gospel. That no one, not Peter, not Judas, not you, not me, is ever beyond the love of God. We read in Isaiah, though your sins are scarlet, they shall be white as snow. And from Paul in Romans, nothing in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Nothing. Not betrayal, not despair, not our deepest regrets, not even suicide. So if you carry pain today, if you've lost someone, or you're walking through that valley yourself, please hear this. Please hear this. God has not turned away from you or from them. Jesus was there in that moment, not watching from a distance, not condemning, but weeping, holding and loving. Psalm 34 declares, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. This is not just a poetic comfort, it is true. And let me say to all those who feel they've gone too far, who failed too badly, you cannot out-sin grace. You are not beyond hope. Jesus still calls you friend. There is forgiveness. You are loved. So friends, let's be a church that makes space for grace. Let's be a place where people don't have to hide their pain, where shame is met with compassion, and where we think of Judas not with contempt, but with a kind of holy sorrow and with hope. Because in the end, resurrection wasn't just for the righteous. It wasn't just for the ones who stayed. It is for all of us. All of us who run, all of us who fail, all of us who wonder if we're still welcome. And the answer every time is yes. Whoever comes to me, says Jesus, I will never drive away. Never. So come to this table, share bread and wine as you are, always loved, forgiven, and always welcome. Amen.